Hello. This final podcast in the series of podcasts that looks at the birth of the Weimar Republic focuses in on the famous Kapp Putsch of March 1920. Quick word about the meaning of putsch. A putsch is an attempted armed takeover of the government, an attempt by a military group to seize power. Wolfgang Kapp was the soldier who led an attempt to seize power to overthrow Weber and the Weimar government in March 1920 when he and a group of soldiers took over Berlin. Okay, so that's what the Kapp Putsch was. And before we look at the details of that, it's just worthwhile reminding ourselves about this particular picture here. Now remember, we spoke about a political spectrum, which, as you can see here, ranges from ranges to the left to the right. We talk about left wing and right wing. Broadly speaking, in the middle, if you're in the middle, you are moderate. In other words, you believe in the process of democracy. You believe that if there's differences about how the country should be run, they should be talked through in Parliament between the political parties, that you shouldn't be resorting to a violent solution to the problems. Okay, so in England today, our own political parties and our own politicians, hopefully, would all fall in that centre area. Politicians, as a general rule, do not believe that you should resort to violent takeover if you don't agree with your opponents. You believe in talking things through with your opponents. Okay. The other difference between left wing and right wing, broadly speaking, wherever you are on the left wing, and that includes the moderates, you believe that more influence should be given to the poor, to the ordinary people. The further you go towards the extreme left, the more you believe that complete influence and power should be given to the working classes. Okay, but if you're in the moderate, this area here, you believe that you should give that it is a responsibility of government to support the interests of the poor, but you do not believe that you should completely take all power away from the middle classes. Over on the right, okay, the more you move to the right, the more you believe that power and influence should be retained by the middle classes, that the middle classes have earned the responsibility, the right to rule through their own hard work. Okay, but again, you have extremes of view, and again, in the moderate region, moderate right-wing politicians would be very sympathetic to the needs of the poor and would want to help the poor as well. So you've got a range of views from left to right. Now, why is this important? What we're talking about here are the extremes. Okay, so the extreme left and the extreme right. We'll start off with the extreme left. Whether you're extreme left or extreme right, what they've got in common is they both hate the Republic. Okay, they both disagree with the Republic. So why is that? The extreme left, they believe that complete power should be given to the working classes. They resent the way Weber believes that solutions should be talked through in Parliament, because they believe that by doing that you are still allowing the middle classes to have influence in the running of the country. So the extreme left, under the key group of the Spartakists, who rename themselves as the Communists, led by Liebknecht and Luxemburg, basically believe it is justifiable to use violence to overthrow the Republic. Now, as we saw, they had an attempt at doing that in January 1919, and they were overthrown. And they were overthrown not by Weber, but they were overthrown by the extreme right. Okay. Now, who are the extreme right? Well, the extreme right have one thing in common with the communists. They also dislike the Republic. Okay, but they dislike the Republic for a different reason. They dislike the Republic because of the stab in the back myth. that we talked about in the previous podcast. They believe that Hebert and the new leaders of Germany have betrayed Germany by signing the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Many of the members of the extreme right would be ex-soldiers who believed that Germany could have won World War One. Okay, so because at that time, remember, when the armistice was signed in November, they were still in France and Belgium, and they had won the war against Russia, and they couldn't understand why the new government in Berlin had signed a ceasefire, and then 7 months later signed this Diktat of Versailles, as it was called. So that is why the extreme right, the Freikorps, although they hated Hebert, they also hated the extreme left, and so they were prepared to work with Hebert to get rid of the extreme left, as they did in January 1919. But that does not mean they liked Hebert. So looking at Hebert and the new government in the middle, in a sense caught in the middle, holding on to power, but not because he's strong, more because each of the extremists hates the other extreme more than they hated him in the middle. So each of the extremists were prepared in some ways to work with him. Okay, so it's important to understand that. So, 1.5 years later, it's now March 1920, the Freikorps once again have lost faith in the government. Okay, remember they worked with Hebert to put down the communists, thus the cross through the communists. The communists effectively have now been taken out of the equation, but because the Freikorps supported Hebert in putting down the communists doesn't mean that they actually like them, because in the meantime Hebert has signed the Treaty of Versailles in June 1919, which forced him to cut the size of the German army. Remember, the army was reduced to 100,000 men. Now, the Freikorps ex-soldiers, ex-army men, were outraged at this. The French were not forced to cut the size of their army by the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The French army was 700,000 men, and so as ex-soldiers they believed that Germany is now exposed, could be easily attacked by France. And they blame Hebert for that. Okay, as difficult as it is for us to understand that, I mean, we know that Hebert had no choice; he had to sign the Treaty of Versailles. But the ex-soldiers are blaming Hebert for weak leadership. Secondly, the Treaty of Versailles basically instructed Hebert to disband the Freikorps, in other words, to remove the guns from these Freikorps, because they were illegal soldiers. They were roving bands of soldiers in the countryside and in the woods and in the mountains who basically descended on the cities to crush the communists. And they had been allowed to keep hold of their guns so that they could crush the communists. But now Woodrow Wilson, the American leader, and the other leaders are insisting that Hebert sort out the Freikorps and tell them to go home and to get jobs. So the Freikorps were very, very disgruntled, very unhappy by early 1920, and in that situation, one of their leaders, a man called Wolfgang Kapp, decided to rearm a group of the Freikorps, and he decided to attack the government. He decided to march on Berlin and try to attempt to remove Hebert and the government and set himself up as the leader of Germany. So in March 1920, and there's a picture of them there, Wolfgang Kapp seized the capital city, Berlin. So you can see the Freikorps, and you can tell from that picture they're not really a very, very well organised group. These are soldiers who a year and a bit earlier had been fighting in the trenches of France and Belgium. They've refused to give over their weapons. They've kind of like formed themselves together, trained themselves, and they have marched on the capital city. And they did seize the capital city. For a few weeks they actually took over Berlin. That's called the Kapp Putsch. Okay, so for a few days General Kapp controlled Berlin and he formed a new government. Okay, but just because you've taken the capital city doesn't mean you have taken the whole of the country. Now it failed because the people of Berlin went on strike. Okay, and when we say the people of Berlin, we mean the workers. The ordinary working people went on strike. Now think about our political spectrum. Which groups which groups on the political spectrum, left, right or middle, which groups are in control of the workers, which groups do the workers support, where do the workers lie on the political spectrum? Well, the answer is the workers lie on the left wing. Kapp was on the right wing. So the workers went on strike. It was the left-wing political parties, particularly the parties more on the extreme left, who basically told the workers to go on strike. So because the workers went on strike, basically the capital city was paralysed. They couldn't get supplies in, the train lines stopped, but more importantly, Kapp, who had seized the capital city, was cut off from the rest of the country. Because the railway workers went on strike, Kapp couldn't get in any troops as reinforcements. So the Kapp Putsch basically failed. The city was paralysed. There was no food. There was no gas. There was no electricity. He couldn't feed his soldiers, and so Kapp basically fled to Sweden. So the Kapp Putsch was a failure. So why was it important? Well, it showed that many workers, ordinary poor people, were actually prepared to support the Weimar Republic in spite of its problems. They would rather have Hebert running the country than have General Kapp running the country. Now, it's the same sort of situation that we described earlier. That doesn't mean they like Hebert, but they would rather have Hebert in the middle running the country than have Kapp on the extreme right running the country. So the workers did not want Germany to be run by the army, okay, because the army was led by the rich. The army leaders were members of the upper classes, so they would rather have Hebert in control of the country. But once again, Hebert and the Weimar government have been shown to be weak, a bit like in January 1919 when the communists attempted to seize power in Berlin. It's the second time in a year and a half that the government has lost control of the capital city. And in each occasion, Hebert was not able to take back control himself. He had to turn to the opposite end of the spectrum to help him out against the group who had seized power. So many people were now asking questions about actually whether the Weimar Republic was the best system of government for Germany. It has signed the awful Treaty of Versailles, which many people see to be a betrayal. It has, on 2 occasions in a year and a half, lost control of the capital city and has had to flee elsewhere. And although it has managed to take back control, people are starting to say, weren't things better when we had the Kaiser, when we had strong government from above? So it's not a strong beginning for the Weimar Republic. A model answer, a question on the Kapp Putsch. This particular one, I mean, there's the mark scheme, and this particular one, it's a scanned answer taken from the Chief Examiner's report. Remember, use the Chief Examiner's reports, very, very useful because they contain marked answers. That was actually a high-scoring answer. Certainly, when I look at it, it is by no means perfect, but have a read. There's some good quality in that answer for that particular question about the Kapp Putsch. Hope that was useful for you. This is the end of the final podcast on the birth of the Weimar Republic. Thank you.